Welcome back, everyone, as we continue to take a look at the last 50 years of Case Western Reserve University athletics and beyond. And in today's Alumni Spotlight, we'll be talking with Ann Harsh. Ann is a 1972 graduate of the Florida Stone Mather College, where she's one of the pioneers of collegiate athletics at the school. She was a captain of the women's basketball team and also played volleyball, and then went on to a successful career at what was then Ernst & Ernst, and was the CFO of the Metro Health System in Cleveland, and in 2006 was inducted into the Spartan Club Hall of Fame. And thank you for joining us today. Welcome. And again, we really appreciate you being here with us today.
Well, it's a pleasure. It gives me something to do while we're all doing nothing and staying home.
For sure, for sure. And I'm always interested whenever we talk with people about hearing a little bit about their journey, not only what they did at, whether it was Case Western Reserve or CIT, or in your case, Mather, but how they got there. And do you mind telling us a little bit about how you found yourself selecting Mather as the college you wanted to attend?
Well, yeah, that's kind of interesting. I grew up in Ohio in a very small town, and I was looking for, where I could go to school. And it so happened that one other girl who was 2 or 3 years older than me went to Western Reserve at the time. I actually applied to Western Reserve University, and during the summer before I came was when the merger occurred. So it was an interesting time to be there, but I wanted to go to, it was a compromise school. I had done a summer program at Kent State and sort of fell in love with it, as high school kids would do with their first experience away. My sister had gone to a small liberal arts college, which my parents really thought was great. It was relatively close to home and worked great for her. So they wanted me to go there. I said I wanted to go to Kent. They thought that was way too big. So we compromised on Western Reserve. Got me a little further away from home, which was great, and turned out to be, just an excellent experience and choice.
Well, and you mentioned being there during the merger, and I'm kind of curious if you could tell us a little bit about that experience, because it's one where I have to imagine unique in a college career where you had these colleges that were all coming together, that were all in the same area, that were fierce rivals, especially in the CIT Western Reserve side, and they were coming together in the early 70s. What was that experience like?
Well, for us as students, we were there to learn something, and the fact that this merger was taking place, to me, it was over on the side, but it did impact us in terms of our classes. For example, my freshman year, I started out in math, and they eliminated the Western Reserve math courses, and they only took the case math. So I had case calculus, which was totally geared to engineers. And those of us that had no engineering desires or background or anything like that were really struggled. I think it was a year or two later that they reinstituted the calculus curriculum that was more of a general calculus, and realized they needed to have that. I remember I was in the marching band. It was one of the things I enjoyed. Well, we played case. So it was some fun times and things going on there. But in terms of dealing and interacting with the other students, the dormitories were still separated, except for, of course, the women who were at Case were in our dormitories, because we had them, women's dorms, and they didn't. And so we got to interact more closely with the few women engineering students. So it was an interesting time.
Yeah, and I have to imagine if you were in the marching band, then that had to be some of the last matchups between CIT and Western Reserve in football as well that you were kind of a part of there, which had to
be. I don't remember if it was just my freshman year or if it happened for 2 years, but it was over, before I left the university. It had gotten merged.
Well, in addition to the marching band, you were also a member of the women's basketball team. You played volleyball, so you had plenty on your plate, certainly. But did you always plan on continuing your athletic career from high school once you went into college?
I I guess, it wasn't a big thought, but yes, I had always done that, always enjoyed it. So it was just the natural thing to do, was continue with the sports. That's just what I enjoyed and what I did. So I continued, and those were the ones that were available. I think we had tennis, and I'd never been a tennis player. But there weren't a lot of other choices to go with besides basketball and volleyball, which is what I'd grown up with. So.
What were athletics like at that point in the school's history? Were you traveling? Was it mostly local schools? Now our
Yeah, it
teams
was.
travel to Boston and New York. I imagine you guys weren't doing a lot of that back then.
No, we went close, the schools around Cleveland, as well as maybe over to like the Youngstown area. That was about as far as we traveled. The freshman year, they dressed us in little skirts for basketball. It was very embarrassing. We kept pleading for regular uniforms, and I think when we were juniors, we got them. It was an interesting time, but we just played the local schools, and you could go over at like 6 or 7 in the evening, have a game, and come home.
You were coached by Nancy Gray, and basketball, and
Yes.
maybe volleyball as well. She might have been every coach at that point, or coached every team, I think, at some point here. But can you share with us what playing for Nancy was like? She's, again, one of the pioneers of women's athletics, really, in the area. Talk about playing for her.
Yeah, she was great. Her and Janet Borer was the other coach that we had. And you're right, Nancy was there for just about everything. And, it was just, she just guided us through it and dealt with us. We never had any bad times. We had some serious times, but it was great working with her and knowing her.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you took the calculus class. They changed to the engineering calculus class. But what did you study while you were in school, and then how did that translate to your career post graduation from here?
Yeah, I did start out with a lot of heavy duty math, and about my middle of my sophomore year, I said, gee, this just doesn't fit me. I'm not liking this. I don't know what I wanted to do. So I switched things up and started to I just said, I'm going to try an accounting, a business classes. And boom, I fell into something that just fit me. And I enjoyed it, went through the rest of my classes and managed to come out with my accounting major, switching sort of late. I had to hustle to get all my all the requirements in, but I did, and it was just a career that fit me. And as you mentioned, when I left school, I went immediately to work with one of the then Big 8 accounting firms, Ernst & Ernst at the time. It went through a few iterations. I ended up becoming a partner with Ernst & Young about 10 years later, and was one of the first women partners in the whole firm.
Wow. And then, the other thing I think particularly relevant at this time right now is that you spent a long time with the Metro Health System in Cleveland as their CFO. If you can talk about that experience, and I imagine having that experience at a time where the world right now is so concerned about whether it's medical supplies or keeping the medical systems functional, you have some interesting insight, I would imagine, looking at that, from your past experience.
Well, I did, at Ernst, I did specialize in healthcare. And so the transition into being a CFO of a healthcare system, was kind of a natural transition. I decided after a good number of years with Ernst, which I was extremely happy with, that it was time for just a little change up. So I went over to Metro Health, and there it was a whole different world, dealing with the doctors, the care providers, but from the business side of it. They were the healthcare providers. I was trying to guide them through the business aspects of that. And we had a good relationship, an understanding of our different roles. I learned a lot about the medical side that I would never have known. But yeah, the struggles of just the economics of healthcare, that's hitting us right now with how much backup do you have versus need and can afford. So and this is, I think, this pandemic is really raising those questions that we haven't looked at that carefully. So it's a tough one.
For sure. Well, we'll go back to some brighter topics here. And when you left the Metro healthcare system, you went on to a pretty accomplished competitive sailing career as well. Do you mind sharing that with us as well, and what you did in terms of sailing?
Well, during my career, I met and married my husband, Ralph Narig, and he introduced me at some point to sailing. I've never been a sailor. And so he had done it just a little bit. So we really learned it together, but we both enjoyed it. And we kind of did what sailors do. We kind of bought one boat and mastered it and moved up to another boat and said, okay, someday we're just going to go sail around the world. And unlike most sailors, we kind of worked on that and we realized that goal. So when you're sailing around the world, it's tough to work. So we had our plans and we worked towards them. And in '98, we jumped onto our boat, not jumped, but moved onto our boat and went sailing. And we spent the next 3+ years sailing around the world. And it was just an amazing experience.
So when you say sailing around the world, because I was about to ask you, how long does it actually take to sail around the world? I have no mental picture of how long that would take, but you said 3.5 years. Is that literally you did not, you lived on the boat for the next 3 years of your life, or 3.5 years?
Well, we actually lived on the boat for the next 6.5 years, but we returned to the States after about 3+ years of sailing. And in that time, we did circumnavigate. And how long does it take? It takes as long as you want it to take. Some people, it takes 10 or 20 years probably to do it. We kind of did it in an expeditious way, but we did manage to cover both of the capes in our sailing. And we probably put, I think, as I recall now, about 40 to 45,000 nautical miles on the boat in that time. And when you think that a sailboat does about 6 knots an hour, you it takes a little while to do that. Of course, when we're on the boat and we're crossing oceans, you're moving 24 hours a day, not an hour at a time or something. But of course, we did stop too. We weren't constantly. And that's where it's how long you stop that determines how long it's going to take you to do all this.
Did you have a favorite stop or a favorite leg of the trip that sticks out in your mind?
Well, we totally enjoyed almost all of it. Some spots were better than others, but we really enjoyed our time in Africa as we visited South Africa primarily and did a safari, which was pretty amazing. Crossing the Pacific and hitting in various of the island groups was another one. Australia. It was just everybody says, what was the favorite? And they were so different. It's really hard to say a favorite absolute stop, but we enjoyed them all. It was an amazing, like I said, experience. And when you do it this way, you visit many spots, but you don't visit really as a tourist. When you get into a spot, you have to go provision, you have to fix what's broken on the boat, you have to do things that a regular local person would be doing. So we really interacted in most of our spots. We would go off and do touristy things, but first of all, we had to take care of the basics for ourselves too.
That's incredible. What an experience. But Do you think that or do you see ways now that your life was shaped by your experience participating in collegiate athletics? Did that have an effect on your life?
Well, I guess athletics has always been something that is important to me. And I think it teaches you, well, what I did, a team perspective, and this the goal setting. How do you work towards the goal that you've got, and training, and getting prepared and focusing on it. So I think athletic comes into that in a very big way.
For sure. My final question, do you have any advice or a message that you could pass along to our current student athletes, some of which who are, over at Weatherhead and are planning on continuing their careers in business, or just any advice you could give them?
Well, my advice is always find what you love to do and do it well. You know, get that thing that drives you, and really get that to the center of your work life, your play life, and just keep going with it. Athletics is essential to your health, and staying with that and continuing. What I do is I'm a race walker, and I compete nationally in that. And so my what I've done has just changed over the years so many times, but it's always been that something out there pushing you and driving you. And if you stick with that, you're going to have a very happy and fulfilled life, I think.
And thank you so much for joining us today. It was really just fascinating talking to you. We could probably go on for hours here about whether it's the sailing or even the race walking or anything. It was very, very, very interesting.
Great. Great. Well, it's always fun to talk about these things. They're great topics for me.
Thank you again, Ann.